The autumn wind swept through the manicured gardens of the Morrison estate as Victoria Morrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her study, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the crystal tumbler in her hand. Behind her, her son Alexander sat rigidly in one of the leather armchairs, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. "You can't be serious, Mother." Alexander's voice trembled with barely contained anger. "You're actually threatening to disinherit me unless I marry someone of your choosing." Victoria turned, her silk Chanel suit rustling softly as she fixed her steel-grey eyes on her only son. "I've never been more serious, darling. You have until Christmas to marry Emma Clark, or you'll lose everything. The company, the estate, your trust fund, all of it." Alexander stood abruptly, his tall frame casting a shadow across the Persian rug. "Emma Clark, my sister's children's teacher, the woman who can barely afford rent in her tiny apartment. That's who you're forcing me to marry?" "Precisely." Victoria's red lips curved into a cold smile. "The wedding will be arranged immediately. You'll propose to her tomorrow." "This is insane. You can't just—" "I can, and I will." Victoria set down her drink with a sharp click. "You've squandered every opportunity I've given you to find a suitable wife. Your lifestyle of parties and meaningless relationships ends now. It's time you learned responsibility, and Emma Clark will ensure that happens by marrying a woman who doesn't even know me, who probably doesn't want this any more than I do." Alexander ran his hands through his dark hair in frustration. "Have you even considered what she might think about being forced into this arrangement?" "Oh, she'll accept." Victoria's voice held absolute certainty. "I've already arranged everything. Her mother needs expensive medical treatment that their family can't afford. We'll cover all costs, but only if Emma agrees to marry you and sign a detailed contract that I've had drawn up." Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. "You're blackmailing her? Using her mother's illness to force her into marriage?" "I prefer to think of it as providing motivation for a mutually beneficial arrangement." Victoria walked to her desk and pulled out a thick envelope. "The contract stipulates that she must remain married to you for at least 5 years, produce an heir, and maintain absolute discretion about the nature of your union. In return, her mother will receive the best medical care money can buy, and Emma will want for nothing." "This is cruel, even for you," Alexander whispered, disgust evident in his voice. Victoria's eyes flashed. "Cruel? I'm ensuring the future of this family. Emma Clark may be poor, but she's intelligent, responsible, and most importantly, controllable. She'll make you settle down and give this family the air it needs. Your happiness is secondary to your duty." "And what about Emma's happiness, her dreams, her life? She's a public school teacher living paycheck to paycheck, taking care of a sick mother. Trust me, Alexander, this arrangement will give her a better life than she could ever dream of." Victoria handed him the envelope. "Tomorrow at 3 p.m., you will meet her at the St. Regis. You will propose, and she will accept. The wedding will be held 3 weeks from now, just before Christmas." Alexander took the envelope with trembling hands, feeling the weight of lives being manipulated within its pages. "And if I refuse, then you'll lose everything, and Emma's mother will lose her chance at proper treatment." Victoria's voice was ice. "The choice is yours, darling, but remember, you're not just choosing for yourself anymore." As Alexander left the study, his mother's words echoing in his head, he didn't notice the slight smile playing on Victoria's lips, or the way she glanced at an old photograph hidden in her desk drawer, a photograph that held secrets that would soon unravel everything she had so carefully planned. Across town, in a small apartment filled with second-hand furniture and graded papers, Emma Clark sat at her kitchen table, staring at an elegant invitation to meet Alexander Morrison at the St. Regis tomorrow afternoon. Her mother's medical bills were spread out before her, the red past due stamps seeming to mock her with each passing moment. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, seeing another message from Victoria Morrison. "Remember our discussion, Ms. Clark. Tomorrow will determine everything." Emma closed her eyes a tear sliding down her cheek as she thought of her mother in the hospital, growing weaker each day. "I'm sorry. Mum," she whispered. "I don't know what Mrs. Morrison wants from me, but I'll do whatever it takes to save you." Little did either Alexander or Emma know that Victoria Morrison's carefully orchestrated plan was built on foundations far more complex and devastating than either of them could imagine. Foundations that would begin to crack the moment they met tomorrow afternoon. Have you ever judged someone without knowing their true worth? Share your experience in the comments. Your story could help others see beyond appearances. The St. Regis Hotel lobby gleamed with old-world opulence, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow patterns across marble floors. Emma Clark stood near a gilded pillar, feeling desperately out of place in her modest navy dress, the nicest thing she owned, yet still woefully inadequate for such surroundings. Her fingers nervously traced the worn strap of her handbag containing the contract Victoria Morrison had given her 3 days ago. "Miss Clark," a deep voice behind her made her jump. Emma turned to find Alexander Morrison studying her with intense green eyes. He was taller than she'd expected, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Despite his polished appearance, she noticed the tension in his jaw, the slight darkness under his eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. "Mr. Morrison," she managed, her voice barely steady, "your mother said you wanted to meet me." A muscle twitched in his cheek. "Did she? Interesting. She told me you had requested this meeting." He gestured toward the hotel's restaurant. "Shall we?" As they followed the maitre d' to a private alcove, Emma felt the weight of curious glances from other patrons. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. The tablecloth probably cost more than her rent. Once seated, Alexander ordered a bottle of wine without consulting the menu. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably until the sommelier departed. "Let's be direct," Alexander finally said, his voice low and controlled. "My mother has orchestrated this entire situation. She's using your mother's illness to force you into marriage with me, threatening to disinherit me if I don't comply. Does that about sum it up?" Emma's fingers clenched in her lap. Yes, though she presented it more as an opportunity." "An opportunity?" His laugh was bitter. "To be trapped in a loveless marriage with a stranger. To save my mother's life," Emma corrected sharply, meeting his gaze. "Something your mother knows I'd do anything to accomplish." Alexander's expression softened slightly. "Tell me about her, your mother." Emma hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo. This was taken last year, before the diagnosis. She was still teaching then, 3rd grade. She loved it. The kids, the classroom decorations, the little notes they'd write her. Her voice caught. "The doctors say there's a treatment that could help, but our insurance won't cover it. It's experimental, expensive." And my mother swooped in like a fairy godmother with a devil's bargain. Alexander finished, studying the photo. Something flickered across his face. Recognition. Confusion. It was gone too quickly for Emma to be sure. "Your mother said she knew mine years ago," Emma said carefully, watching his reaction, "though she wouldn't elaborate." Alexander frowned. "That's impossible. My mother never associated with poor people?" Emma supplied coldly. "Yes, I'm aware of the social chasm between our families. Mr. Morrison, your mother made that abundantly clear." The wine arrived, and Alexander waited until the sommelier departed before continuing. "What exactly did my mother tell you about this arrangement?" Emma pulled out the contract. 5 years minimum. An heir within 3 years. Complete discretion about the nature of our marriage. In return, my mother gets the treatment she needs, and I get, she gestured vaguely at their surroundings, all this. And you're willing to sacrifice your future for this? Wouldn't you? For your mother, Emma challenged. Alexander fell silent, and Emma saw pain flash across his features. My mother isn't who you think she is. Ms. Clark, she's manipulative, calculating. She's offering to save my mother's life, Emma interrupted. Whatever her motives, that's all that matters to me. Alexander studied her for a long moment. You're nothing like the women she usually approves of. You're poor, unrefined? Yes, we've established that. Real, he finished quietly. You actually care about something beyond money and status. It makes me wonder what her true agenda is. Before Emma could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Victoria Morrison. I trust everything is proceeding as discussed. Attached was a photo of her mother in the hospital, taken that morning. With Victoria standing beside her bed, Emma's hands began to shake. She's with my mother right now. Alexander's expression darkened. Of course she is, keeping her leverage close. He reached across the table, surprising them both by taking her trembling hand. Ms. Clark, Emma, we're both being manipulated here. But I promise you, we'll figure out what she's really planning. Emma met his gaze, seeing genuine concern there. I don't have the luxury of time to investigate your mother's motives, Mr. Morrison. My mother doesn't either. Alexander squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Then, to Emma's shock, he stood and walked around the table. Dropping to one knee beside her chair, he pulled out a velvet box. Then let's give my mother exactly what she wants, he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. Emma Clark, will you marry me? Not for love, but for survival. Yours, your mother's, and mine, and while we play my mother's game, we'll work together to uncover what she's really after. Emma stared at the ring, then at Alexander's face. Seeing determination replace the earlier resignation in his eyes, she thought of her mother in the hospital, of Victoria Morrison's cryptic comments about the past, of the strange way Alexander had reacted to her mother's photo. Yes, she whispered, her voice stronger as she repeated, yes, I'll marry you. As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, neither of them noticed the elderly waiter watching from across the restaurant, his aged hands shaking as he pulled out his phone to make a call. Mrs. Morrison, it's done, but there's something you should know. I heard them talking about investigating the past. And the girl? She looks just like... Thank you, James. Victoria's voice cut him off sharply. That will be all. She ended the call and turned back to Emma's mother's hospital bed, where the weak woman was just beginning to stir from her medically induced sleep. Soon, Victoria whispered, touching the simple gold locket around her neck, identical to the one Emma's mother wore. Everything will be exactly as it should be. Grandma Rose's journal held invaluable life lessons. What family wisdom has changed your life? Give it a like if you have a family story that taught you the true value of things. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparations that felt more like an elaborate theatrical production than a celebration of love. Victoria Morrison orchestrated every detail with military precision, transforming the Morrison estate's grounds into a winter wonderland for the Christmas Eve ceremony. Emma stood in what would soon be her new bedroom at the Morrison mansion, surrounded by racks of designer clothing that had appeared mysteriously overnight. Through the window, she could see workers erecting crystal-draped pavilions in the garden. Everything sparkled, everything shone, everything felt utterly false. The dress fitting is in an hour, Alexander's voice came from the doorway, though I'm sure my mother's already reminded you 3 times this morning. Emma turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, his casual stance betraying the tension in his shoulders. 4 times, actually, but who's counting? He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Over the past 2 weeks, they'd developed an unexpected alliance, meeting in secret to piece together the puzzle of Victoria's manipulation. There was something comforting about his presence now, despite the strangeness of their situation. I found something, he said quietly, pulling an old photograph from his jacket pocket. It was hidden in my father's old study. Emma took the photograph, and her heart stopped. The image showed 2 young women, arms linked, smiling brightly at the camera. One was unmistakably a younger Victoria Morrison. The other, that's my mother, Emma whispered. But that's impossible. Your mother said they only met recently through my teaching at your sister's school. Look at the background, Alexander pointed. Both women were standing in front of a familiar building. The St. Regis, Emma recognized. The same place where we got engaged, yes. But this photo was taken 30 years ago. Alexander ran a hand through his hair in frustration. They weren't just acquaintances, Emma. They were friends, close friends, judging by other photos I found, until something happened that made my mother erase every trace of their relationship. Emma sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind racing. My mother never mentioned knowing Victoria Morrison. Never. Even when we started receiving anonymous donations for her medical bills last year. She froze. The donations. They started right after I began teaching at your sister's school, which means my mother has been planning this for at least a year. Alexander sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his arm against hers. But why? Why orchestrate this elaborate scheme to get us married? Maybe it's not about us at all, Emma said slowly. Maybe it's about whatever happened between her and my mother 30 years ago. Before Alexander could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Victoria Morrison entered without waiting for a response, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. There you are, both of you. How cozy. Her eyes flickered to the photograph in Emma's hands, and for a fraction of a second, something like pain crossed her perfect features. The dress designer is waiting, Emma. And Alexander, the prenuptial agreement lawyers need your signature on some additional documents. Mother, Alexander stood, his voice hard. What really happened between you and Catherine Clark? Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual cold smile. Ancient history, darling, nothing that concerns you. It concerns us enough that you're forcing us to marry. Emma stood too, finding courage she didn't know she had. We deserve to know the truth. Victoria walked to the window, her back rigid. The truth? She touched the locket around her neck, the one Emma had noticed she never took off. The truth is that some debts can never be repaid. Some mistakes haunt us forever. She turned back to them, her eyes shining with what might have been tears. The wedding will proceed as planned. In time, you'll understand why this is necessary. She strode toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Emma, your mother's latest test results came back. The experimental treatment is working, for now. I trust that reminds you of what's at stake here. After she left, Emma felt her knees give way. Alexander caught her before she could fall, pulling her close against his chest. She could feel his heart racing, matching the frantic beat of her own. She's threatening my mother's treatment, Emma whispered against his shirt. If we don't go through with this, we'll find another way, Alexander promised, his arms tightening around her. There has to be a connection between what happened 30 years ago and now. Something in my father's study, or maybe at your mother's apartment. Emma pulled back slightly, looking up at him. In the past 2 weeks, something had shifted between them. What had started as a forced arrangement was becoming something else, something that made her heart skip when he looked at her like this. Your mother wants us to get married on Christmas Eve, she said softly. That's in 8 days. Then we have 8 days to uncover the truth. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Whatever happens, Emma, we're in this together now. Not because of my mother's schemes, but because A commotion in the hallway interrupted him. The door burst open, revealing a panicked maid. Mr. Morrison, come quickly. Your mother. She collapsed in the garden, and she's asking for Mrs. Clark. She keeps saying she has to tell her something before it's too late. Emma and Alexander exchanged alarmed looks before rushing from the room. Neither noticed the old photograph falling from Emma's hand, landing face down on the floor. On its back, barely visible in faded ink, was a date and a cryptic message. Christmas Eve, 1993, the night everything changed. V and C forever bonded by blood and secrets. The same date their wedding was planned for, exactly 30 years later. True change begins when you decide to become a better person. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more stories that remind us there's always hope to change. The hospital corridor seemed endless as Emma and Alexander rushed toward the private wing where Victoria Morrison had been admitted. The pristine white walls and antiseptic smell brought back painful memories of Emma's own frequent visits to her mother in a much less luxurious facility across town. Victoria lay pale against the crisp hospital sheets, her usual perfectly coiffed appearance disrupted by medical monitors and IV lines. Her eyes fluttered open as they entered, focusing immediately on Emma with an intensity that was unsettling. "Catherine," she whispered before blinking and seeming to remember herself. "No, Emma, you look so much like her, so much like she did that night." Alexander stepped forward, taking his mother's hand. "Mother, what night? What happened between you and Catherine Clark?" Victoria's fingers clutched at the locket around her neck. "The doctors say I had a minor heart attack. Stress, they claim." She laughed bitterly, "as if I haven't been living with this stress for 30 years. "Mrs. Morrison," Emma approached the bed carefully. "My mother. She's never spoken about you, not once. But that photograph we found, of course she never mentioned me." Victoria's voice cracked. "How could she, after what I did, what we did?" Her eyes darted to the door. "Alexander, darling, could you ask the nurse for some water?" It was a transparent attempt to get him to leave, but Alexander hesitated only briefly before complying, squeezing Emma's hand as he passed. Once he was gone, Victoria's composure crumbled entirely. "We were best friends, your mother and I," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than sisters. We shared everything, dreams, secrets, promises. We even made a blood pact on Christmas Eve 1993, swearing we'd always protect each other. That same night, we discovered we were both pregnant." Emma felt the world tilt slightly. "Pregnant? Catherine was married to your father, a wonderful man who taught at the local university. I was engaged to Richard Morrison, Alexander's father, but there were complications." Victoria's hand trembled as she touched her locket. "The pregnancy test results got mixed up at the clinic. We didn't know. We couldn't have known." "Known what?" Emma's heart was pounding. "That night after our blood pact, we celebrated at the St. Regis. There was an accident on our way home, a terrible accident." Tears began sliding down Victoria's cheeks. "Your father was driving. He didn't survive. Catherine was devastated, hysterical. She was rushed to the hospital, where they discovered—" Victoria's voice faltered. A machine beeped insistently in the background. "The babies," Emma whispered, beginning to understand. "What happened to the babies?" "Catherine lost consciousness. There was so much confusion, so many doctors. When the dust settled, I had a healthy baby boy, and she had a beautiful baby girl. We both assumed—" Victoria's voice broke completely. "We didn't know until years later. When the truth came out, we made a choice. A terrible, necessary choice." The door opened as Alexander returned with a water cup, but Emma barely noticed. Her mind was racing, putting pieces together. Her mother's reluctance to discuss her pregnancy, Victoria's obsession with uniting their families, the matching lockets. "Mrs. Morrison," Emma's voice shook. "Are you saying—" "The babies were switched," Victoria whispered. "Alexander is Catherine's biological son, and you, Emma, you're mine." The water cup crashed to the floor as Alexander froze in the doorway. Emma felt the room spin, memories flooding her mind. Her mother's sad smiles when she'd ask about her birth, the mysterious donations that started when Emma began teaching at Alexander's sister's school, Victoria's desperate need to unite their families. "No!" Alexander's voice was raw. "That's impossible. You're lying." "I wish I were." Victoria closed her eyes. "When we discovered the truth, years later through a routine medical test, we agreed to keep it secret. Your father, Richard, had died by then, and Catherine's husband was long gone. We thought it would be easier this way. But the guilt, the weight of watching my daughter grow up from afar. So this wedding," Emma felt sick. "You're forcing your biological daughter to marry your best friend's biological son. How is that making anything right?" "You don't understand." Victoria reached for Emma's hand. "The accident that night, it wasn't just bad luck. Richard, Alexander's legal father, he was following us. He knew about Catherine and me, about our friendship that he thought was inappropriate. He was the one who ran your father's car off the road. Alexander stepped forward, his face ashen. My father was a murderer? He was a jealous, controlling man who couldn't stand the thought of losing me to anyone, even a friend. After the accident, he used his influence to bury the investigation, but the guilt drove him to drink, and eventually, Victoria's voice trailed off. When he died, I thought I was finally free to make things right. But by then, you were both grown, with your own lives. How could I destroy everything you knew? So instead, you orchestrated this. Alexander's voice rose. Used Catherine's illness to force us together. What kind of twisted logic is that? I needed to unite our families properly, legally, Victoria pleaded, to give you both the truth, but in a way that wouldn't destroy everything. Once you were married, I planned to tell you everything to make it right. Make it right? Emma stepped back from the bed, bumping into Alexander. His hand steadied her automatically, but she felt him trembling. You've been lying to us our entire lives, and now you're forcing us to... She couldn't finish the thought. A commotion in the hallway interrupted them. A nurse rushed in, followed by a familiar figure in a wheelchair. Catherine Clark, Emma's mother. Or was she? The woman who had raised her looked pale but determined, her own locket gleaming against her hospital gown. Victoria. Catherine's voice was weak but clear. I got your message. It's time, isn't it? Time to tell them everything? Victoria nodded, tears streaming freely now. I'm so sorry, Catherine. I thought I could fix it all, make it perfect. Perfect? Catherine wheeled herself closer to the bed. Like that night was supposed to be perfect. The night we swore to always protect each other, only to have everything fall apart? Emma felt Alexander's hands tighten on her shoulders. Mom, she whispered, not sure which woman she was addressing. Please, tell us the whole truth. No more manipulation. No more schemes. Catherine reached up to touch her locket, then slowly opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph, a newborn baby with dark hair and green eyes. Victoria's locket contained a similar photo, but of a fair-haired infant with blue eyes. Emma found herself looking between Alexander and Catherine, seeing the same green eyes, the same determined set of the jaw, then at Victoria, recognizing her own blue eyes and delicate features reflected back at her. The truth, Catherine said softly, is that love isn't always simple. Victoria and I, we were more than friends. Richard Morrison discovered our relationship and was determined to destroy it. The night of the accident, we weren't just celebrating our pregnancies. We were planning to leave, both of us together with our unborn children. Victoria picked up the story, her voice growing weaker. When Richard caused the accident, he didn't just kill Catherine's husband. He killed our dreams, our future. In the chaos that followed, with the baby switched and Richard threatening to destroy us both if I ever left him, we chose to live a lie, to protect you both. And now, Alexander's voice was hoarse. Why force us together now? Because I'm dying, Victoria whispered. The heart attack, it's not the first. I needed to make sure you both knew the truth, that you had each other. The marriage contract was just a way to keep you together long enough to understand. Understand what? Emma demanded. That family, Catherine wheeled closer to Emma, taking her hand, isn't just about blood. It's about love, the love that raised you, the love that protected you, and she glanced meaningfully between Emma and Alexander, the love that grows even in the strangest circumstances. Emma felt Alexander's grip on her shoulders loosen, then slide down to take her other hand. She looked up at him, seeing the same confusion, anger, and something else, something deeper, reflected in his eyes. The wedding, he said quietly. It's in 3 days. On Christmas Eve. The anniversary of when everything changed, Victoria confirmed. I thought it could be when everything was made right. Emma turned fully to face Alexander, their joined hands between them. The past few weeks flashed through her mind. Their quiet conversations, shared investigations, the growing trust and understanding between them. What had started as a forced arrangement had become something else entirely. "What do we do now?" she whispered, searching his face. Alexander looked down at their entwined fingers, then back at their mothers. Both their mothers, in different but equally real ways. "We have a choice to make," he said finally. "All of us." Behind them, Victoria and Catherine exchanged a look heavy with 3 decades of secrets, love and regret. The machines continued their steady beeping, marking time as 4 lives hung in balance, waiting for decisions that would reshape everything they thought they knew about family, love, and truth. The Christmas Eve wedding was less than 72 hours away, but suddenly it meant something entirely different than what any of them had imagined. Sometimes the harshest criticism comes from those who should support us. Have you had to defend your life decisions to others? Share your story of overcoming challenges in the comments. Christmas Eve arrived with gentle snowfall, blanketing the Morrison estate in pristine white. The wedding pavilion stood ready, crystal decorations catching the winter light, but the atmosphere was vastly different from what Victoria had originally planned. The guest list had been cut dramatically, leaving only those who truly mattered. In what was once meant to be a bridal preparation room, Emma sat before a mirror, her wedding dress simpler than the elaborate one Victoria had originally chosen. Catherine, the woman who had raised her with endless love, sat beside her, both their lockets now containing both baby photos, a symbol of the truth they had finally embraced. "Are you sure about this?" Catherine asked softly, adjusting Emma's veil. "You don't have to go through with it just because of our past." Emma caught her mother's hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm not doing this because of the past. I'm doing it because of the present and the future we choose to build." Down the hall, Alexander stood with Victoria, who had been released from the hospital against medical advice, determined to be present for this day. She looked fragile but resolute in her wheelchair. "I spent so many years trying to control everything," Victoria admitted, straightening Alexander's tie with trembling hands. "I thought I could orchestrate the perfect solution, force happiness into existence. I was wrong." "Yes, you were," Alexander agreed, but his voice was gentle. "But sometimes the wrong path can lead us to the right destination, if we're brave enough to choose love over fear when we get there." The ceremony space had been transformed. Gone were the ostentatious decorations and elaborate displays of wealth. Instead, simple elegance prevailed. White flowers, warm candlelight, and an intimate gathering of those who understood the true significance of this union. When the music began, it wasn't the grand orchestral piece Victoria had originally planned, but a simple piano melody. Emma walked down the aisle between both her mothers, Catherine in her wheelchair on one side, Victoria on the other. The symbolism was lost on none of the few guests present. Alexander waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. The past 3 days had been filled with long conversations, tears, and ultimately understanding. What had begun as a forced arrangement had transformed into something real, something chosen. The minister, one of the few who knew the full story, began not with traditional words, but with a truth that resonated through the room. Love, in its purest form, is not something that can be forced or manipulated. True love grows in the most unexpected places, often through challenges that seem insurmountable. Today, we witness not just a union of 2 people, but the healing of 2 families, the triumph of truth over secrets, and the power of choosing love over fear. Victoria and Catherine sat together in the front row, their hands clasped, 30 years of secrets and sacrifice finally laid to rest. They watched as their children, both biological and raised, exchanged vows that came from their hearts rather than a contract. "Emma," Alexander's voice was steady as he spoke his personal vows. "When we first met, we were both pawns in someone else's game. But through all the lies and manipulation, we found something real. You taught me that true strength isn't about control or power. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to love despite fear." Emma's eyes shimmered with tears as she responded, "Alexander, what began as an arrangement has become my choice, my true, free choice. You've shown me that family isn't just about blood or birth, but about the love we choose to give and the truth we dare to face. I promise to walk beside you as we create our own story, one based on honesty, understanding, and real love." As they exchanged rings, the simple bands they had chosen together replacing the ostentatious diamond of their forced engagement, Victoria leaned toward Catherine. "We thought we could protect them by controlling their lives," she whispered, "but they found their way to love on their own. Not because of our manipulation, but in spite of it." Catherine squeezed her hand. "Maybe that's the greatest gift we could have given them, the opportunity to choose love for themselves, even if it came through our mistakes." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and as Alexander and Emma shared their first kiss as a married couple, the room filled with not just applause, but with the warmth of genuine joy and healing. At the intimate reception that followed, Victoria asked for everyone's attention. Standing from her wheelchair with Alexander's support, she addressed the small gathering. 30 years ago, on a night just like this, I made choices born of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of facing truth, fear of letting love simply be love. Those choices cast long shadows over all our lives. But today, I've witnessed something extraordinary. The triumph of love over fear, of truth over manipulation, of freedom over control. She turned to Emma and Alexander. "You two have taught me what I should have learned long ago. That real love can't be forced or arranged. It grows in its own time, in its own way. You took what was meant to be a business arrangement and transformed it into something authentic and beautiful." Catherine joined her. Their shared past, now a bridge rather than a barrier. "And you've shown us that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by the love we choose to give, the truths we dare to face, and the forgiveness we offer to ourselves and others." As the evening progressed, snow continued to fall outside, each flake a tiny crystal of possibility. Emma and Alexander shared their first dance, not to the elaborate waltz Victoria had planned, but to a simple love song that spoke of choosing each other every day. Later, as they prepared to leave for their honeymoon, a simple cabin in the mountains rather than the luxurious European tour originally scheduled, Emma found herself alone with Victoria for a moment. "I spent so long wondering about my birth mother," Emma said softly. "But now I understand that I was blessed with two mothers, each of whom loved me in their own way, and that love, complex as it was, led me to Alexander." Victoria touched her cheek gently. "You found your way to love not because of my schemes, but because your heart was open to it. You and Alexander taught me that the greatest act of love is sometimes letting go of control, of fear of the past." As Emma and Alexander drove away, the Christmas lights twinkling through the falling snow, they left behind two mothers who had finally found peace with their past, and a gathering of people who had witnessed the truth that real love can't be forced. It can only be chosen, nurtured and cherished. Their story became not just about a rich woman's manipulation or a forced marriage, but about the triumph of authentic love over control, of truth over secrets, and of the courage to choose one's own path to happiness. It stood as a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful destinations are reached by the most unexpected paths, and that love, real, chosen, authentic love, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds and transform the darkest secrets into bridges toward a brighter future. What would you have done in Emma's place? Would you have forgiven Victoria's manipulation once you discovered the truth behind her actions? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective could help others see this situation in a whole new light. And what about Alexander and Emma's love story? Do you believe that sometimes the most beautiful relationships can grow from the most unexpected circumstances? Tell us about a time when life surprised you with something wonderful that seemed impossible at first. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps us going, allowing us to bring you powerful emotional stories every single day that remind us of what truly matters in life. And if you enjoyed the emotional journey of this story, you won't want to miss the powerful tale waiting for you on the left of your screen. Trust me, it's another unforgettable journey that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last second. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we least expect them. Remember, every subscription helps us continue sharing these moving stories that remind us of the power of love, forgiveness, and the unexpected ways life can surprise us. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family.